Anyway, let's talk about real quick, Ariel. Let's get into our games of the week. And since we're already talking about D2, let's start off with the two D2 games that are going to define a generation. These two games that are happening in D2, my two games of the week, are literally going to define a conference. And I think that they possibly could determine who's going to be the champion in the CIAA and in the SIAC. And also, they will determine who makes the D2 playoffs. And I'm talking about Benedict versus Albany State and Virginia Union versus Bowie. The weekend has come, and the schedule makers, man, they did us a service. Oh, my gosh. So let's start with Benedict and Albany because I am the SIAC. I know, I'm not the SWAC. I ain't SWAC. Eddie Robinson SWAC, I ain't SWAC, but I'm SIAC, though, and I'm proud to be SIAC, so I'm a rep for the SIAC. And I'll just tell y'all that first and foremost, this game, as far as I know, is going to be on HBCU League Pass home team. Make sure to check that out. But this game has huge implications. I personally believe that the winner of this Albany-Benedict game, they're going to make it to the SIAC championship because I don't see a loss on Albany or Benedict's schedule. Now, granted, I am a Fort Valley State University alum, and I am going to always and forever pull for Fort Valley State University. That is my HBCU. However, I just don't think after what I saw against Benedict, I just don't think that Fort Valley presently is ready to contend with the top teams in the conference. I think that we're going to be the number 3 team for a minute because Benedict's now come up. But I think you give Coach Sean Gibbs, that A&T Aggie, you give him some more time. You give them some time to recruit in Peach County. Go to North Carolina and get some of them players. Go to South Carolina. Go to Louisiana. Go to Alabama. Get some of them players. I think he's going to put together an amazing team. And I think eventually Fort Valley is going to once again reign in the SIAC East. But I think that right now Albany has the crown and Benedict is the number 1 contender. So I want to be honest. I don't know what's going to happen at Fountain City Classic. We'll talk about that more when we get to that point in November. But also I want to say that the winner has an amazing chance to make the D2 playoffs because typically only 2 teams make it. And the SIAC champion, the CIAA champion, especially if they have a good out-of-conference record, they make it. Now, Benedict hasn't played a lot of out-of-conference games because they're currently undefeated. They played in conference. They played Elizabeth City State to start the season, but that's not like, it's not like you're playing Valdosta. Like Union played Valdosta and they beat Valdosta. So we know Virginia Union is most likely if they beat Bowie and they win out and they win the CIAA championship, they're going to make the playoffs off the strength of that because that was the number 2 team going into that game. But Benedict hasn't played those teams. Albany played FAMU pretty well and they beat Shorter. They beat a couple other, non-SIAC opponents that was very interesting. But I think that one of these 2 teams, they're going to make the playoffs for the SIAC and they're going to represent. So this is a very consequential and important game. But here's the thing. Last year, Albany State beat Benedict 28-6, but Benedict on Albany's first drive, Ariel, they got a pick 6. They got a pick 6 and they were up 6-0 on Albany State, but Benedict missed the field goal. So they still got problems, in the special teams with the field goals. I don't know what's going to happen with that. They need to make field goals because I think that's what it's going to come down to. Because when you look at Albany State and Benedict this year, they're pretty similar. Albany State's holding their opponents collectively to 11.2 points per game. Benedict's holding their opponents to 8 points per game. So Benedict has a 3-point edge. But Albany, those numbers are looking really good on defense. Albany and Benedict are both rushing teams. Now, what I will say is that I think Albany's quarterback is a little bit better than Eric Phoenix. However, Benedict is a run-first team. So that's one thing with Benedict. But Albany is actually a pretty better rushing team. We look at the stats. So you look at Albany, the team collectively has 201 rushing yards per game. They rush 5.6 on average per attempt. They have 18 rushing touchdowns to Benedict's 167 yards, 4.6 average 4 attempts, and 12 rushing touchdowns. So Albany, honestly, is the slightly better running team, but they're not that far apart. But with passing, they're almost identical. Albany averages 188 yards per game. They get 8.91 average yards per attempt in passing and 8 passing touchdowns. Benedict, they average 187 yards per game, 7 yards average per attempt, and then 12 touchdowns. So 8 passing touchdowns versus 12. Albany, are you going to be able to pass on Benedict's defense? Like, because they're holding teams to 8 points per game. I think that's going to be something we need to look at. But the quarterback battle, Ariel, Deontay Manu versus Eric Phoenix, is going to be an interesting battle because they're both great quarterbacks in the SIAC. So Deontay Manu, is he going to be able to light up the scoreboard against Benedict? Because on the season, he's 64 of 120 in completion. He's 53% in his completions. He's passing for 179 yards per game. And also he has 134 rush yards. And he has 7 touchdowns, and 3 of them are rushing touchdowns. So will he be able to be a playmaker and score? Because Albany State hasn't put up big numbers on offense. They honestly haven't. Their defense has been so dominant that they don't really have to score all that much. So will they be able to make it happen against Benedict, who essentially you're playing yourself? You're looking in the mirror and you're playing yourself. Sometimes in video games, Ariel, I always go back to video games. Sometimes in video games, Ariel, you're able to play as the same team. You're able to play as the Lakers and then play against the Lakers. I can play as Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, and I can play against the Chiefs defense. Like sometimes in video games, you can do that. This is just like that in real life. You're playing against the same team. Albany is playing against Albany and Benedict's playing against Benedict. They're the exact same team because Eric Phoenix is very similar stats. Eric Phoenix, 65 for 106 on passing this year. He's thrown 0 interceptions, which I think is very interesting. He has a 61% completion, so he's more accurate. He averages 122 passing yards per game. He has 89 rush yards. He has 8 touchdowns in general, 2 rushing touchdowns, 6 passing touchdowns. So I think that honestly, Ariel, across the board, Albany and Benedict, pretty similar. But I think what's going to determine the game, and I'll say this really quickly, is Benedict's rushing attack versus Albany's historically great defense. Because I think Albany, I know Benedict's holding their opponents to 8 points per game. I think they'll regress to the mean, I think eventually. Now, they've had a pretty tough opening part of their schedule, and they've won. But I don't think they're going to continue to hold teams to 8 points per game. That's pretty dominant. And Albany's been dominant for a while. So I want to see if Benedict's rushing attack can go up against Albany's defense that holds teams to 136 rushing yards per game, and their opponents, FAMU, like they played shorter. They played at Will Waters. They played Miles College. All of these teams collectively, including FAMU, have only accounted for 2 rushing touchdowns, Ariel. So only 2 rushing touchdowns coming in. And Benedict is a run-first team. So what does that mean? That means that if Albany comes through and that defensive line isn't letting you get through, you got to pass that ball. And that means that now you might be out your element. So is Benedict going to be able to pass on Albany's defense, and are they going to be able to run? Because if you take away that run option, now you got to pass, and now you're out your element. And I want to just say that Benedict rushed for 299 yards, and they got 3 rushing touchdowns versus Fort Valley. I'm going to say it. It's the truth. But against Savannah State, 174 yards, 1 touchdown in that Thursday game on ESPNU. So my question is this game going to look more like the Fort Valley game, or is it going to look more like the Savannah State game? Just saying. Also, Benedict averages 187 passing yards per game. Albany State holds teams to 139 passing yards per game and only 5 passing touchdowns, while Benedict has 12 passing touchdowns total on the year. So what's that going to look like for Eric Phoenix? What's that going to look like? Just saying. Noah Zaire Scotland is going to be on the bubble because it looks like he's going to have to find a way to get past Albany's run defense. He's a great running back. He's honestly one of the best running backs in the SIAC for sure. But come on, 402 yards, 85 attempts, 6 touchdowns, 4.7 yards per carry. If he can figure it out, Benedict can win. And he rushed for 112 yards against Savannah State on 22 attempts. But one thing that I've seen, his numbers have slid. I don't know what's going on. Is he injured? Is the defense figuring him out? Because he rushed for 47 yards on 9 attempts versus Fort Valley, and he had 15 carries versus Miles, only 45 yards. So Fort Valley is a good defense. Miles College traditionally is a good defense. Now you're going up against the number 1 defense in D2 last year. And they brought back a lot of their players this year. I want to see what's going to happen, but I think Albany's going to win. I hate to pick against Benedict. I hate it. But I think Albany's going to win. Like, Benedict is rolling, but Albany is a superpower. And I just don't think that Benedict is ready to unseat Albany because I think their defense, Albany's defense, is too dominant. That's what I honestly think. I think that they're going to be able to contain Noah Zaire Scotland. And when they contain him, now you have to run options. You got to pass. You got to figure out different ways to get the ball down the field. I think the Albany has a game plan for that. I think it's going to be an ugly game, but Albany's going to win. It's probably going to be like maybe 17-10, 13-10. Maybe it's 0-0. I don't know. But all I know is going to be tough. And somehow, some way, Albany going to get a safety. They're going to get a field goal. I don't know. It's going to be 3-0. Albany going to win. But Benedict, I'm proud of y'all. And I hope that y'all do get the win because I am a Fort Valley alum, so I'm sort of pulling for y'all. But I think Albany's going to win. Now, really quickly, let's go to Bowie versus Virginia Union, Ario. This is my second game of the week. This is the classic battle between the number 1 and number 2 teams in the conference, and Bowie and Virginia Union, they're a part of the CIAA North. You have the North and the South in the CIAA. Bowie has been the superpower in the conference. They won 3 straight championships from 2018 to 2021. They did not play in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But to be real, Ariel, they probably would have won 4 straight because Bowie was dominant at that time. And during that run, Bowie beat Virginia Union 3 times, Ariel. 2018, Bowie wins 27-13. 2019, Bowie blows them out 52-17. 2021, just last year, Bowie wins 27-7. Virginia Union has always been on the bubble, and they've always, these past few years during this championship run, they've always been the second team behind Bowie. Is it time for them to finally break through? Honestly, Ariel, I don't know. I honestly don't. Because Valdosta played Bowie in the playoffs, beat them 41-17, but Virginia Union beat Valdosta. You had Jada Byers putting up historic numbers on Valdosta. So they share them in common, and Valdosta got Bowie out the playoffs with Damon Wilson. I'm just saying. And then on top of that, Virginia Union, I'm pretty sure they're going to be, if they make it to the CIAA championship, they're going to be playing Fayetteville State. And guess what? Fayetteville State was on their schedule, and they won a tough game, 31-28. If Virginia Union wins out and they go to the CIAA championship, most likely that's their opponent. So you play Valdosta and you beat them, the number 2 team. You play Fayetteville State, which has been the nemesis to Bowie, and you beat them. Now the final boss is Bowie. You got to get past them. They've not been able to beat Bowie. Now's the time. And you have a player that could get drafted out of D2 just like Joshua Williams. You have a player that can contend for the Harlon Hill Trophy. And what the Harlon Hill Trophy is, that's the Heisman for D2. And Ariel, there's not been an HBCU player that has won the Harlon Hill Trophy. I think Jada Byers can. Already, he has over 1,000 rushing yards on the season, and it's only through 6 games. He averaged 910 yards and 12 touchdowns last season. He has 13 touchdowns this year, and the season ain't even over yet. They got to play divisional games. So he is having a dominant, historic season. And this is what was crazy to me, Ariel. 2 things. Number 1, he rushed for 319 yards against Valdosta. Now, I talked about it a couple weeks ago. Valdosta's rushing defense is terrible. Like they're trash at rushing defense. Ferris State ran through them in the D2 championship, and then you have Virginia Union that ran through them. And Valdosta's been struggling this year. Ariel, Jada Byers rushed for 319 yards versus Valdosta. Can Bowie contain Jada Byers? That's the real question, and I think that's the only real key because Bowie has a good rush defense. They've held their opponents to 105 rushing yards per game and 8 touchdowns on the season. Bowie has some good coaches, and they're a good team. They have championship pedigree. Are you going to be able to slow down Jada Byers, who is only a sophomore? Ariel, he's a sophomore. What the world? This man is legendary. Is this the new Shannon Sharp for this generation? He's only a sophomore. So imagine how good he's going to be as a senior if he decides to stay and not get drafted. Imagine that. So you're dealing with this young man on his ascension. So I think this is going to be a generational type of game. I think that Jada Byers announces himself because sometimes you need signature wins. And I think that Virginia Union, they beat Bowie and they finally get over the hump and stop this 3-game losing streak against the champions. I think that this will be the time. And also Deion Golette Jr., he's a great quarterback. He's passing for 125 or 194 on his pass attempts, 64% completion, 13 touchdowns on the season, and he lit it up against number 16 ranked D2 school at that time, New Haven. So will he be able to pass against Virginia Union's dominant defense? When Union holds teams to 185 passing yards, he averages 271 on the year and got 266 passing yards versus New Haven, 17 of 30, 3 touchdowns. But the big story is Jada Byers. And Jada Byers versus that Bowie defense. And Ariel, I'll just say this and I'll pass it over to you. I think Union wins. I think that finally they get over Bowie. And Bowie has to retool and come back. And you got you got a Hill candidate, Ariel. A Hill candidate. The D2 Heisman. He gonna win that. I think that's gonna happen. I think that after this, they beat Bowie. They win out. They go to the CIAA championship. And then we see what happens in the D2 playoffs. But that's what I'm thinking. Those are my games of the week. You got Bowie versus Virginia Union on the CIAA Sports Network. And you have Benedict versus Albany on the home team, HBCU League Pass. So make sure to tune into that.